Hi, Jared. Nice to have you with us today. Maybe before jumping into the topic, maybe Jared, a few words about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. Great to connect with you again. Excited to be here. So, again, my name is Jared Greenhill. I'm a senior director at Palo Alto, specifically Unit 42. So, day to day, I'm involved with some of the most prolific incident response and digital forensics cases globally. I'm also an adjunct professor at George Mason University, where I teach in their Masters of Digital Forensics program.
Well, super. Maybe to get started, Jared, maybe the first thing is, obviously the question is, the basic question is, are you ready as it is now with respect to forensic and incident response? If I'm the senior manager or if I'm the board, how do I know?
Yeah, it's a tough question, Guy. I think when I start thinking about how to know, it's sometimes it takes an incident to really test the theory that you think you might be ready. If that's not the case, working towards going proactively in the direction of obviously an incident response plan, tabletop exercises that simulate a real life situation. That's one aspect. But then also from a visibility standpoint, when we think about forensics, we're probably thinking about, do we understand, or hopefully we're thinking about, do we understand what our inventory looks like globally? So if there was impact to our business with regards to security, would we be able to touch or get a hold of the devices that we wanted to perform forensics on or incident response on? So I think those are some starting points that I try to frame a lot of the folks that I work with, a lot of my customers, and also individuals that want to understand that question. I kind of start there usually.
So yeah, I can easily imagine it. And it shows that, even though you want to do sophisticated work with forensics, you are enabled or disabled by the basics. So getting the basics right is very important. I think one thing maybe upfront before we go a little bit more in depth, we always talk about forensic and incident response. And in the mind of many people, they are very related, or sometimes even basically the same thing. How would you differentiate them just to be academically a bit academically separating them?
Yeah, I'll try to break it down and kind of the ways that I've seen it personally. When we think about digital forensics, we're thinking about a full deep dive on whatever that system is. Maybe it's a Windows server, maybe it's a Linux web server, whatever that asset may be. We're talking about getting a physical copy of the system and digging as deep as possible, really performing 100% of a deep dive across all of the evidence that you have with regards to that specific system. When we think about incident response, we're thinking speed, right? So how do we triage? How do we answer 70% of that 100% of traditional full forensics? We want to say, is there a problem? If yes, what does that look like? We're trying to really get through it quicker.
Okay. And I guess, I mean, in my mind at least, you have to have a little bit of an imagination or understanding of what the bad guys might have tried to do. So to have some idea where you should look, and of course you can look everywhere, but having a bit of a sense of where to look first, and what may have been the logic of the attacker helps to move faster, I assume.
So a lot of times people struggle with, like, where do I start? And it's really exactly with what the incident was. How was it detected? How was it reported up? What do we know about it? And then again, coming up with a timeline and moving forward and backwards temporally to answer some of those questions to say, yes, there's a problem, or maybe no, there's not.
Well, I mean, maybe before we dig into deeper about what does it mean actually conducting forensics investigations and so on, and playing together with incident response, or even preparing for it in a better way. I think maybe it's a good idea to start with an example.
Yeah, I think so. So when I think about some of the major incidents I've seen this year with, Unit 42 and leading some of our most prolific investigations with large customers. So ransomware has certainly been a big issue since, 2014 or so. It's been ramping up. A threat group that I've dealt a lot with over the last year and a half or so, a little bit less, has been Black Basta. So they're one of the more popular ransomware groups that's very effective, very devastating when they get into an environment. Right, their ultimate goal is to get paid, and then also ensure that through usually double extortion, meaning if you don't pay us, or you can pay us for a decryptor if we've decrypted your environment or encrypted your environment, or you need to pay us because we'll shame you publicly on our website that shows that you're a victim of our attack. So we'll say the TTPs or tools, techniques, and procedures are very similar every time, and they usually a forensic investigation is. So, we've tried to bring that in right away to start answering some of the harder questions around what was the initial infection vector, what were the steps in between, ultimately until usually data is exfiltrated, right? And there's a ton of pieces in between, but that type of threat actor is usually coming in through, in the case that I'll talk about, they'll usually come in through phishing and they'll infect the user and they'll get a piece of malware installed on the system called QBot or QuackBot. That's been in the news quite a bit recently with a publicized FBI takedown. But they'll usually start there, get a foothold in the environment. And this is kind of the case for the example that I'm talking about, where we have a global company, you know, 100,000 or so employees impacted by this group. And generally, they came in and within about a day or so, were able to get inside the environment, enumerate the environment, and ultimately exfiltrate, many terabytes of data. So there's a lot of pieces in between, but where the forensic investigation and incident response lies is that we had to be doing that really quickly to, one, know if the adversary was still in the environment, and then two, um, kind of figure out how we were going to paint the picture and tell the story of what the attacker did, what they touched, and exactly what they stole. So that's kind of the 50,000 foot view, Guy. Hopefully that resonated. Yeah, there's a preservation phase, there's an investigation phase, and then there's a remediation phase, right? Ultimately, in a lot of these big incidents where, as you said, we need to understand what happened, but then we also need to, in parallel, help the customer get back up and running, right? Get business back.
How much time, in take your example you gave before, how much time do you have? A day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days to do your work, or hours?
There's not a cut and dry answer for this, but days to weeks, and hopefully not many weeks, is, again, very big victims. So it's not like a lot of times it's not small and medium sized business where that would be much faster. But if it's a large organization, you're up against, you need a little bit more time.
Is there anything I can do beforehand so that when should I have my own stuff? Should I have an agreement with someone who would support me if necessary?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think it's a little bit of all the things that you touched on. We started with talking about inventory earlier. It is usually unreasonable for every organization to know where all their assets reside, literally taking like a host name and bringing it back to like an IP address or where it's located. But at a minimum, let's think about just understanding where our crown jewels lie in an environment, meaning if the worst case happened, where would I be most sensitive to an attack, right? So understanding where my intellectual property or my key assets live. So I think let's leave it there for just inventory, right? That's important to really, because attackers are usually going to head in that direction, right? So that's one piece. Another piece would be, from a visibility perspective, understanding if endpoint detection and response software EDR can be deployed in an environment, right? So usually larger environments, this is going to be something that's needed because they're globally disparate and you need to have the ability to touch a system to collect key artifacts quickly from, right? Triage, when I mentioned that earlier, that's what that's about. That's usually done with EDR. When we think about full forensics or deep dive forensics, we're thinking about physical images usually, or logical collections of a body of files to help us investigate. So generally we'll have, larger organizations will have an internal capability for incident response and digital forensics. So yes, they'll want to have instrumentation and tooling to do that, hopefully locally to an extent, right? Your information security team will be able to have a subset of folks that can look at that evidence and dig into that analysis, as an organization internally. And then kind of the last piece that comes to mind is having a retainer, right? Having a retainer with the incident response and digital forensics firm is important because there's going to be times that you run into things that you can't handle completely, where you need to complement your internal teams with external teams that are well versed in incidents that maybe you've never seen before from both a depth and breadth perspective. Those things come to
Okay.
mind, Guy.
Well, these are very important things. So, any comment on the pressure you are exposed to when something like that happens?
I think the one thing that we have been moving towards at Unit 42 to be effective in these situations is a model that we call incident command, meaning that you have someone like myself or a fairly senior leader coming in to be the commander of the incident, especially when it's really large, because there's a subset of, a ton of different tasks really that need to be done that we touched on, from, investigation to remediation. And there's, the legal aspects, there's PR, internal, external, there's regulations depending on what country you're in. It could be everything from, GDPR to the SEC in the US that wants things reported now in 4 days or less. So incident command is kind of the direction I think that some organizations have been moving towards, especially when they reach out to a third party like, Unit 42. They want somebody to come in and give them specific instructions on, how to handle the incident. So that's been something we've been working to respond to some of these most prolific incidents and incident response scenarios that we've been facing, or our clients have been facing, that we're supporting.
Okay, clear. Let's jump now to the financial side. I mean, how do I have to think about organizing myself to make forensics cost-effective, I should say, or affordable?
Yeah, a lot of, and it's a good question. So a lot of small, medium-sized business or SMBs they still face the same threats that larger organizations do. I think when you're smaller, you need to be thinking about, even large or small, you need to be thinking about your business decision around and risk appetite for a cyber event, right? So you're doing the same things. You have an incident response plan. You have, hopefully you've been trying to perform some tabletop drills, some simulations. You've been proactively working towards, hey, if there's an incident, I need to be as prepared as possible. I think the main difference is with SMB, a lot of times due to budgetary concerns, they'll often have incident response retainers with an organization to, basically support them in the time during an incident. They often don't have large security teams. Maybe if they have one, it's very, it's just a few people, depending on the size, right? If you're really small, you might not have anyone at all. So you're looking to a third party to help you at the time of an incident. So incident response retainer is the first things that come to mind. And then another thing for SMB is, cyber insurance. So it looks a little bit different all around the world, but cyber insurance, there generally are policies that can support you, right, to lower your financial burden in the event of a cyber attack, right? So you have a policy, the policy will be set to a certain amount. Let's just say it's $1 million. You'll write it in a way that's commensurate with the coverage that you want. So, maybe you want ransomware coverage in case something happens to you. So you'll have a budget then that escalates as needed around an incident. And so that's usually a big necessity for small and medium-sized businesses, Guy.
Sure, super. Thank you for taking us on this journey, and looking forward to the future videos. Thank you so much, Jay.
Yeah, my pleasure.